your screen. That being said, let me welcome Andre Vittorio, who's also my boss, president of Ideological Systems Inc. Andre has been living in the world of managed IT and cybersecurity for over 25 years, and he has some eye-opening info to share with us today. Our second speaker is Philip Ber. Philip is a leading enterprise risk management expert and commercial insurance broker with FSB Commercial Limited. Our third speaker is Jamie Lembeck. Jamie is a cybersecurity dark web advisor who provides intelligence-led security education to organizations so that they can effectively manage risk in a complex threat environment. So welcome speakers, and thank you for taking the time to talk with us today. Now, our agenda for the day is the evolution of cyber attacks. That's the topic that we will cover throughout the presentation. We will then move on to why should I worry about cyber attacks and understand some incident breakdowns. We will discuss cyber attacks specifically in Canada. We will then lead on to conversations about dark web, cyber liability, insurance, and then we will move on to addressing the question of the hour, which I'm sure everybody is excited about, which is how to move from the position of defense to offense against cyber criminals. We'll also address some of the questions that you may have, which you can share on your chat box, and then finally announce the draw winners. So without further ado, let's begin. And Andre, the virtual floor is all yours.
All right, thanks, Aniri. Aniri's very curious here about paying attention, so I'll make sure I'm paying attention. Before we get started, I just want to make sure everybody can hear me. If you can open up your chat box and push Y in there, if you can hear me. And if you can't hear me, press N. And let's see if everybody is able to, there we go. Gotcha. Just letting that go through. Excellent. All right, let's get started in cybersecurity. So, the evolution of cybersecurity, cyber attacks. Let's take a look at this slide over here, and everybody can see the slide, I assume. It all started in the late 80s. That's generation one. That would be where your traditional viruses started, standalone PCs. You know, think about this time, there was really no internet, and that's what drove products like Norton antivirus. And everybody knows about Norton antivirus. Then generation two started, where we started networking computers, and attacks from the internet started to happen. So that drove the creation of what are called firewalls. So those of you that own businesses and even at home, pretty much everybody knows what a firewall is at this point. And then we move into the early 2000s, where hackers are trying to exploit the vulnerabilities in applications and programs that businesses use. So there was an introduction of intrusion prevention system, or IPS. So you can see how everything is starting to pile on top of each other. Then generation four started around 2010, where basically attackers were trying to put a payload into an office. So to insert software into networks of computers, and what they would use is they would exploit weak or out-of-date software. So when Microsoft says we're no longer supporting Windows 7, for example, there's a reason for that. So now that software is vulnerable to these type of payload attacks, where people can exploit a hole in the software and put something malicious inside there. And now we're here living in generation 5, which is where we're doing large scale sort of multi-attack points, mega attacks, using advanced tools, using artificial intelligence, using anything that criminals can get a hold of to try to steal your information. And because we've all learned through generations 1 through 4 how to protect ourselves, it's getting harder for a hacker to get a door open and try to break in that way. Now they want to trick you into giving up your information, giving up your keys to the kingdom. So we're gonna talk more about that. Okay, next slide, Aniri. So why should I worry about cyber attacks? So your personal and your business identity and your finances are at risk. So whether you own a business or whether you're an individual, you're a target for hackers, for cyber criminals. So the number one goal that cyber criminals have is to make money, nothing more at this point. So how do they make money? They want to steal intellectual property. So if you're a manufacturer, your design is very sensitive or would be of value to another country or another company. There's people that are trying to steal intellectual property to sell it. There's people that want to force your organization to pay a ransom. So you may have heard of ransom. And a colleague of yours or even yourself have experienced this, where your computer is locked up and it says, if you don't pay this amount of money, in the next 24 hours, we're going to destroy all your data. So people pay attention to that, and usually people pay in a lot of cases. So that's a good moneymaker for hackers. And then the other one is to sell your personal information. So what do you mean by your personal information? Well, if I can generate an identity from your name, your first name, your last name, possibly your address, passwords that you may have used on a website, social insurance number, things like that, world. So this information can be sold en masse. So we're going to get into a little bit more about this in a couple of slides. But basically, your credentials are the keys to the kingdom. So with them, a hacker is you. So if I can get a hold of somebody's username and password, I can log into Amazon, I can log into their bank account, I can log into their credit cards, I can do pretty much anything that you can, with the exception of your fingerprints. But other than that, I could set up a mortgage, I could open up another bank account, take out a loan, all of these different things. So you can see how there's a big push to try to extract as much personal information out of people as possible. There. So how are these breaches happening? So this is a little breakdown on, a quarter of cyber incidents are the old style, malware, ransomware, hacking, etc. The majority of them, 79.5%, are trying to compromise or steal credentials. So again, credentials are username, password, and then other types of personal information. That's the focus, because that's where the money is for crime. So next slide. All right, so how are these are set up in a way to try to steal your personal information? How do hackers do that? Well, they do something called phishing, not with an F, with a PH. And the phishing idea is to try to trick you, giving up your username and your password. And at this point in time, all of you should have experienced some type of phishing at one point or another, where you get an email that looks kind of suspect, and we're going to go through that. But this is, for all the technologies that are out there, this is still the best one that hackers use to try to get into systems. So let's continue on about what phishing looks like. So if you or an employee of yours is using any one of these services, you're at risk of being phished, okay? So at any given time, Rogers is sending you communications, or Expedia is sending you communications, and most people are really, busy, stressed out, not paying attention. So a hacker can build a trick, basically, to trick you into signing into a bogus website. And the sign-in procedure, where you're putting your username and your password in, is then extracted out, and they keep it. So I'm going to show you how a hacker can quickly build a trick email and send it out. So the name of the game in this world is volume. So if you send out a phishing attack to 7-8 million people, and you get a 1% click rate, or 1% giving up of data rate, it's pretty good, because it didn't really cost a whole lot of anything. So this is an example of a kit now where I could build a Netflix spoof, or a Netflix to try to fool you into giving up your information, a phish. So basically, I would create this in a little tool like this, and I would say, dear Aniri, and we're contacting you to alert you that your account details may be updated in accordance, et cetera, et cetera. You're like, okay, well, I want to make sure Netflix is working. So then I click on update account, and if you go to the next slide, and now I got a sign-in page that I made, and you're going to type in your email, and you're going to type in your password. You're going to hit sign in, nothing's going to happen, but I'm going to get your username and password as the hacker. You're going to think something was wrong with the internet, and you're just going to ignore it and carry on and try to do it again. So in that quick act, I just got your username and password, and chances are that that same username and password is being used at Amazon, at Apple, at Bed Bath & Beyond, at all these different places, because people are people, and try to use the same password for everything to keep it simple, right? So hackers are exploiting that at a regular basis. So you can see how very easy it is, and how easy it is to trick people. And you can imagine, replace Netflix with Rogers, replace it with an Expedia. We need you to update your trip details, et cetera, et cetera. Whatever it's going to take to get you to put that username and password in, that's the goal. So other examples, the next slide here. Other examples are trying to get you to click on a link. So, you may be smart enough to say, well, I'm not going to put my username and password in there. other attempts. Let's get you to click on this link instead. What happens here is they'll redirect you to a website that will then insert something into your machine without you knowing about it. So this is an example now of an email that appears to be coming from the CDC in the United States. But if you look carefully, and us Canadians, we may not know what the actual email address is, because it kind of looks okay. So if you point up to the top red box, there's cdc-gov.org, kind of looks legit, but that's not the actual CDC website address. The CDC website address is www.cdc.gov. So already it's suspicious now that it's coming from an unknown source. It's not actually coming from the CDC. And this link here is even more tricky because it's actually not the real link. If you were to hover over that, that would take you to another location. So again, this is getting you to trick you into doing something. And these are very, very common, and they're getting more and more sophisticated as, you know, they're using the most advanced tools to make sure that they can spoof you into believing that this is real. So let's go into another example. This is a real simple one. So, dear sir, right? Use the link to download these safety measures. So if you're not really paying attention, and it catches your interest that you want to learn about safety measures for the coronavirus, you would have clicked on that PDF, but there's not actually a PDF there. That's another malicious link that'll take you somewhere to insert something into your machine, and it'll just feel like the internet just sort of hiccuped. Like nothing really happened. I don't know what went on here, but the insertion happened on your machine, and now those people are in your machine. So the other way to get people's usernames and passwords is to insert some key logging software. So if they can get a little program into your computer, then they can track all your keystrokes that you're putting into the system, and that's getting sent back up to some central computer somewhere, and they can just parse through there and see, okay, well, here's where they typed in, bmo.com, here's where they typed in their bank card, and here's where they typed in their password. And now you got both of them, bank card number and the password. So again, this is all boiling down to get you to click on something, get you to give up information, get you to go somewhere, etc. So let's take a look at the next example here. Okay, this is a good one. So this is a little quiz for you guys. So if you guys can look at this carefully, if you put in the chat box which one you think is the real one. I think everybody can see that okay. So I'm gonna give it just a minute here, and there's no judge. Just type in which one you think is the real one, the real Facebook sign-in page. Let's see. Okay, so a couple of people picked one, and the majority of people picked two. So the number one is the fake one. So had you signed up on that page there, had you logged in, you would have given up your Facebook credentials to a hacker. So how is this different? So the only way that you can tell this is different is by looking up in the address bar. You can see that there's a / facebook.html. And then on the other one, there's facebook.com. And then more importantly, if you look on the left, there's actually no little key lock. You look right next to, on the right on facebook.com, you see there's a little key lock there. Okay, so these are little indicators that are telling you that these websites are safe, but you can, and legitimate. So you can see how easy it is to trick people. If you can make it look as that the actual login part is line by line identical. The only way you can tell the difference is on the address bar. And most people are not looking at the address bar. They're looking at the content inside of the actual screen. So you can see now how if a hacker can get you to this location, they can trick you into getting your username and password stealing your username and password. So you probably would have received this as a link saying, so-and-so has sent you an update on Facebook that you need to look at or something like that. You'd click on that link and it would take you to number one here. And you'd be very hard pressed unless you knew what you were looking for to know that you were being phished at that point. So let's move on to the next slide here. Happening all the time. It's just not making the news the same way that, well, now COVID obviously is making the news. But, as recently as May 2nd, York University had a major cyber incident. So it was affecting a large amount of their servers and workstations. So I'm not going to tell you in public what happened, but basically it's a breach of credentials. So the other big people want is to get administrators' credentials. So my credentials, for example, gives hackers keys to all kinds of places, as you can imagine, all kinds of great places where they can go in now and impersonate me or be, insert software, et cetera, et cetera. So depending on different people in your office, some credentials may be worth more than others, right? So if I can get somebody at the Bank of Montreal to give up their username and password, and they happen to be come right in as that person. So there's countermeasures for that, so don't panic. And most businesses have that in place at this point. But again, it's always about tricking the individual. The weakest link right now in security are humans. So the technology, the firewalls, the software, all that stuff is quite advanced and quite effective, but you still can't prevent humans from making mistakes, and that's what's being exploited here majority of the time. So you can see other examples. It's in the news all the time, usually buried somewhere. Now, us in the IT world, we're going to get a lot of this news bubble up to the surface because we're looking for it. So, every week I get a report, this week in breach, and Jamie knows what I'm talking about. And basically, it tells me all the major security breaches that have happened over the world and what happened in terms of what was stolen or what was breached or what the ramifications were. So it makes the news quickly and then it disappears, but it's happening on a regular basis. And it's happening to big and small companies. Nobody is immune to this. Because if you remember back in the beginning, if I can steal people's usernames and passwords, thousands of them, hundreds of them, there's enough sophisticated tools that I can target 1,000 businesses within seconds and try to extract as much information as possible out of it by sending in these phishing exploits, if that makes sense. Let's move on to the next slide.
Yeah, this is very interesting, especially because since the outbreak of the pandemic, the dialogue and the awareness of the cyber attacks have just like increased, right, in the last few months. Brings me to ask a question to our speakers, which is like, in Canada, how are we dealing with cyber attacks and cybersecurity? Like, are we serious enough compared to US and the rest of the world? So Jamie or Philip, why don't you start us with helping us answer that question?
Very much. We are seeing more and more situations where there are cyber attacks taking place on people, on companies and people. Generally speaking, you need to understand, Andre touched on it a little bit, but you really need to understand that this is a crime of opportunity. In many cases, these criminals really are not targeting a company specifically unless there is very, very valuable information that they want. They're sending out hundreds and hundreds and thousands of emails hoping that people bite, and in many cases, people do bite. So do we see it? Yes, we see it a lot in Canada and the United States. Andre just touched on the COVID scenario, and this morning I was on a call with a number of other people, and interestingly enough, we are now starting to see COVID-related emails that are being sent to people saying, this email is to advise you that you have been in contact with someone that has COVID. Please go to this URL and enter your personal information so that we can now track you. And this is a completely bogus email. So very, very timely. The criminals are using every opportunity they can to get the information. So yeah, to be quick, we're seeing it more and more. And I'll talk about education in a later slide. Thanks, Aneri.
Thanks, Philip. Andre, what do you think?
Yeah, it's definitely on the rise, and it's not, again, like I said, it's not on the news. And one of the biggest targets that was happening at the beginning of the COVID crisis was hospitals, because hospitals were in a stressed state. People are not paying attention. They're trying to work as quickly as possible. And so there was a big focus on trying to lock up hospitals and as ransom. So, and this is in Canada and in the US. Canada is not any more immune than the US or any part of the world, because a lot of this hacking is not happening in Canada or the US. It's from overseas. And, you know, they're not even delineating between the US and Canada. They're just going by IP address blocks, if you will. So everybody knows what an IP address is at this point. So, you know, Rogers has a block and Bell has a block and all of Canada has a set of blocks. And basically, you know, the reach of cyber criminals is unlimited. So if I want to target, you know, 170 million people simultaneously, it's just a click of a button. So it's not like I have to load in a bunch of people's email addresses, things like that. So there's so many different ways of getting in that I think Canadians sometimes feel like, well, that's like an American problem. And it's not the case at all. It doesn't have borders whatsoever.
Awesome. Thanks, Andre.
Jamie probably has even more to add about this.
Yeah, Jamie would have like an outsider's perspective on Canada.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, because we're not, like Andre said, right? It's not in the news. That's the problem. It's not in the news. It's not a topic, you know, that is being talked about. You know, when we talk about COVID, I mean, the hackers are going after the people that are making, you know, the but making the shots. So immunization. Vaccines, yeah. So I mean, they're going after them. Why are they going? Are they going to find out the intellectual property behind it so that they can be first to market? Because a lot of that happens. You know, is the people in Canada being hit? You know, or are they not taking it as much serious or taking it as serious? You know, I can't say from that perspective. I can say from a small, medium business is that people think they're immune. They don't think that they're going to get hit. The reality is that they're a target. They're a target because the hackers know that small, medium businesses, you know, don't spend money on IT security, right? So they're not training their individuals. They don't have a cybersecurity readiness plan in place. So when they hit them, they use those smaller organizations as a conduit to a larger one. We've seen an ungodly number of examples. I'll use Target, which, you know, comes in the States and in Canada. You know, Target was hit. It was as a result of their HVAC contractor. You know, the contractor got hit. They passed that payload onto Target. Their point of sales POS systems were hit as a result. Yes, they had cyber liability insurance with it, but it still cost them millions and millions of dollars. You know, for those larger organizations, you know, there's a PR hit, right, for them. But for a small, medium business, you know, unfortunately, after getting hit, it's you know, 6 months, you know, 60% of small, medium businesses go out of business within 6 months. You know, so the attacks, they're everywhere, man, they're everywhere, everywhere, every day. Walking in stores these days, you know, people can be skimming RFID devices to be able to capture your credentials as well. Facebook, anybody who's using socials, if you're participating in any kind of lists or games or, hey, what will I look like in 20 years, like when I was 18, you know, a lot of that stuff is being used to gather information on you to do things that are malicious. So, you know, it's something to really take into consideration, and, you know, we'll dive more into it here in the rest of the deck.
Yeah,
and cybersecurity is cybersecurity is such a vast subject. Like, we really tried to pick just a couple of different areas to talk about within an hour, but we could be talking for days about all the different ways, you know, criminals go about trying to exploit companies and the technologies that they use and the tactics that they use. So this is just a very small slice, because it seems that this one here is easy enough for people to wrap their heads around, because it's email based in a lot of cases, and it's their username and passwords that are being taken.
absolutely. And I think it is kind of like safe to say that, you know, nobody is immune. And that being said, like, nobody is like, the cyber attacks are not really confined within the geographical boundaries, which now brings me to an interesting topic of dark web, which I think Jamie is going to walk us through. Just like Jamie, help us understand what is dark web and how things work in that side of the world, if you will.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. So to get an understanding of the dark web, let's talk about what we're familiar with. All of us are using Google, Facebook, you know, the socials, the surface web types of things. The surface web is basically composed of about 4% of the gross internet, right? So what we're using on a daily basis is only 4%. The next level that's below that surface web is the deep web. Deep web is primarily made up of pretty much anything and everything that has ever transpired across the internet is there. A lot of researchers use it, you know, so universities are using it. It's basically a depository for information. Those Snapchats, if somebody's using Snapchat, all of those Snapchats are there. They just haven't been broken yet as far as somebody compromising and getting into them. But below that is the bad part, and that's the dark web. The dark web is basically there's marketplaces, there's internet forums, or chat rooms, stuff of that nature, where these people that have malicious intent can go and purchase things no different than you can out, on eBay or Amazon. But the things that they're purchasing are credentials, or they're purchasing those phishing kits that Andre was just showing you. Ransomware kits. I mean, literally anything that you can think of is being sold. Passports. Canadian passport goes for $712 out there on the dark web. So I could become a Canadian resident overnight. US passport's about $950, $975. So you can buy anything. Credentials are there. So anything that can be monetized, you will find on the dark web. So it's a bad place. It's not, it's not mysterious, something that's made up like by Hollywood. This is a real place. And if somebody has ill intentions against you and your organization, they can go out there and procure, tools to be able to go after you. And those tools, that you need to basically have in place to be able to protect it, or stuff like this, right? Is that we have to have the approach of a zero trust environment. We have to, understand that, the individuals within our organization, that we make sure we have the right people, accessing the right, having the right credentials to access the right devices with the right permissions. So making sure that, we understand that because that dark web is out there, we have that zero trust factor, is that any individual that comes in or the way that they're, connecting to our environment, we have to understand that they don't have, or excuse me, that they possibly have been already hacked, or they have ill intentions. So we have to make sure, again, that they have the right people, securely accessing the right machines with the right privileges, and then constantly ongoing and monitoring for those compromises to make sure, that, again, that somebody's not coming in and doing something wrong, because everybody's a target. Everybody's a target, as Andre had mentioned.
Beautiful. The next slide is going to be a major eye opener. At least it was for me. So there,
Absolutely.
Jamie, take it away.
Absolutely. So for everybody that's on the call today, what we did is we ran your domains, right, to see, what's out there, what's for sale out there on the dark web, credentials that are exposed. And mind blowing, right, for everybody here, is that we have 427 compromises. That's 427 opportunities that the hackers, and it's not just one hacker, but thousands of people could use to be able to go in and do things malicious against you and your organization. With those phishing side of things, is that they could take this information that is there to be able to do what's called credential stuffing. So they're using a username and a password to go against your financial institutions, like Andre had mentioned as well. And the success rate, 93% of login attempts on financial institutions are fraudulent. The success rate on taking those credentials is 0.1 to 0.3%, so 10 basis points to 30 basis points on 1 million records, and 1 million records is nothing. On 1 million records, that means 1,000 to 3,000 successful attempts to log in. So, having a tool that's in place to be able to, monitor the dark web to see what's out there, not only that there's an exposure and, hey, change your password, it's more than that. It's to find out, is it Molly in accounting that keeps getting hit? Why is she getting hit? What is it that she's doing? Or a salesperson, making sure that they have the proper tools in place, from a device backup, a VPN connection, secure Wi-Fi for when they're out on the road. The departments, what is it that a department is doing that may cause these exposures? The trend analysis that comes to fruition as a result of having a tool in place to monitor for dark web compromises helps you exponentially in being proactive to protect your environment in case the hackers are coming after you.
That is just mind-blowing, don't you think? Just like we had over 50 registrations for this webinar, and 427 amongst that 50 credentials were compromised.
Just to clarify that for everybody. So what this means is that on a site somewhere, you may have signed up for MyFitnessPal, for example, and MyFitnessPal gets hacked and they steal all the usernames and passwords from MyFitnessPal. and you signed up as Andre V at ideological.com. So now that username, Andre V at ideological.com, and the password that I used in MyFitnessPal is now exposed on the dark web and shows up in this 427. So if I use the same password for MyFitnessPal that I use for Amazon, that I use for Apple, then it would have already been hacked at this point, because somebody would have gone in and tried to use those credentials. So what this number is telling us is that everybody on the call here has exposure on the web from a username and password that's available on that sort of Amazon for the dark web to be bought and sold. So if you don't take anything else from this webinar, change your passwords.
Absolutely.
Everywhere.
Yep.
Right.
And make sure you don't use the same passwords for different websites that you have a username and passwords to.
Right.
Yeah, awesome. So we understood and we went through the sophistication of cyber attacks from Andre and Jamie. Now let's just dive into, like, what's our absolute last resort when it comes to cyber attacks. And Philip is going to walk us through some of the key points around cyber liability and insurance. So Philip, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Neri. Can we go to the next slide?
There you go.
So some of the things that you should be thinking about and looking to a insurance broker when it comes to cyber liability insurance is really, what is their experience in the space? What's their background? Do they have a number of insurance companies that they can go to get you the appropriate quotes that you need for your business to be able to get the protection? One of the interesting things about cyber liability insurance is that it can be a standalone coverage. So you don't necessarily have to go to your existing insurance broker to get that coverage. If they don't have the experience, there are other brokers out there that can provide you with that type of policy. But before we sort of talk about cyber insurance and what do you need to know, there's a bunch of questions that you should sort of be asking yourself to get ready for the questions that a insurance broker is going to ask you. And be aware of these types of things, because this is what the insurance company is going to look for when you fill in an application form. And what they're looking for is, what type of information are you storing? How are you collecting it? Where are you storing it? In what jurisdictions are you collecting, storing, and transmitting the information? I.e., do you work in Canada? Do you work in the United States? Is your data stored here or in the United States? What are you doing in the EU? Because the European Common Market has a very, very specific set of regulations and compliance issues with respect to storing data, transferring data, and how you have to report. And the GDPR regulations are much more onerous than they are in North America. And so are you compliant with those regulations? Do you know what those regulations are? And your broker can help you. Your cyber liability broker should be able to help you, or at least talk to, what are those compliance requirements? What are the regulations? What do you need to know? The other things that you would want to have in place are, do you have a breach response plan? Are you working with your IT provider and the software companies that are providing that to put together a breach response plan? Because that's going to be important to the insurance company to understand, how well prepared are you? Have you done any forethought? What have you put in place to understand the issues around cyber liability? Things like, are you training your staff? What type of training are you giving your staff? Andre brought up a number of very important points in terms of how the cyber actors are putting together very sophisticated emails and phishing attacks. So training is a very, very important factor in this whole cyber liability and cyber insurance world, because those are the types of questions that you're going to find on an application form. Another really important piece is, what are you doing in terms of wire transfers? How are you providing that information? What backup are you using? Are you using two-step data authentication? So when it comes to looking at cyber insurance, the application forms are going to ask you very specific questions. And so a broker that plays in this space is going to ask you all of those questions prior to you completing the application form, to make sure you have all the pieces of the puzzle in place. so that when you do go out to market and start to get quotes, you're going to get some reasonable premiums, reasonable prices. Next slide. So the question that I'm frequently asked is, how often should we conduct a cybersecurity audit? Should we be doing cybersecurity audits? What do we need to do to make sure that we're protected? And so this is a question that really needs to be asked in terms of what type of business are you in? What are you doing? What type of data are you collecting? How valuable is that data? And then have a conversation with your IT provider to understand the process in doing a cyber security audit and going through that process. Generally speaking, we like to see a company doing a cybersecurity audit at least once a year, or perhaps once a year or once every 2 years, depending on the type of business they're in and the valuableness of their data. Next slide. So the big issue here is really understanding the geographies that you work in, where your data is stored, and then understanding what are your compliance obligations with respect to the privacy agencies in those jurisdictions that you're working, whether it be Canada, the US, or Europe. When you're working with a broker that understands the cyber liability space, they should be able to tell you, look, these are the requirements within the GDPR regulations, and look at what you're using and how you're doing it. If you're in Canada, they're going to be the regulations around PIPEDA or PIPEDA and the Privacy Commissioner and what they're looking for. So the compliance obligations are different in different jurisdictions. Know where you're operating and make sure that you have some understanding of what your compliance requirements are in the event that you are breached. Next, so when is coverage triggered? This is a question that we get asked all the time. Generally speaking, what you want to do as a user is to constantly be monitoring what's going on in your environment. Your IT provider should be able to provide you with the information in terms of usage on the internet, if there is some sort of spikes in volume on your systems, and keep track of what's going on so that you have some understanding of what's going on with your systems, denial of service attacks, those types of things. Generally speaking, coverage gets triggered as soon as you think you have a problem. If you're not sure, you can again check with your IT provider and have the conversation with them. And the minute that you think that you potentially have a problem, or you see a virus, or there is some sort of inkling of something occurring, that's when you should be getting in touch with your cyber broker, the broker that sold you that policy, because the insurance policy will have some very specific wording in terms of when to contact them. In many policies, we have the ability to provide funding for forensic audits, to pay ransomware, to pay for these types of things. But coverage generally gets triggered when you become aware of, or you think you have a problem, and the insurance company wants to get in there as quickly as possible with their resources to determine if there is a problem. So I think that's it for my slides, Aneri.
Thanks a lot, Philip. This was very insightful. I'm pretty sure our participants were able to gather some useful insights from what you just shared. Now let's move on to the question of the hour, which is how to move from the position of defense to offense against cyber criminals. So let's break this down into two. Let's start with what business owners can do to protect her or his business from Gen 5 cyber attacks. And Andre, why don't you start?
Okay, so, as a business owner, I'd almost prefer traditional crime over cyber, because traditional crime, you can get your head around it. Someone smashes a window, steals a bunch of things, you call the police. It's everybody knows what to do, kind of thing. Cyber attacks are so insidious because, first of all, people don't understand it fully. It's not tangible enough to them, and by the time it happens, it's way too late. So that's why we're trying to educate people as much as possible, because I said this is going on whether we like it or not as business owners. So, some of the things that every business owner should be doing in their business right now to stop this is two-factor authentication. And I know some of the folks that are on here, they already have that going in their system and others don't. So what two-factor authentication is that when you put in a password or username and a password, there's a second factor to authenticate. So you have your username and your password, and then you have this changing number, for example, that you would put in as well. So even if a criminal was able to steal your username and password, and that code, that one-time code, it evaporates within 30 seconds. So the password is useless to them. So they would have got your email address and they would have got a password, but without the second factor, they can't get into the system. So this is fairly inexpensive to put into companies, and is, should be on all the sensitive logins and whatnot to your organization. So that's one. Two is monitoring of the dark web. So that's another fairly inexpensive tool that you can have. So you can get alerted when your employees have breaches that have been detected in the dark web. So those are the two that, if you have a very limited budget, putting those in is going to help quite a bit. Other ones are more sophisticated to try to find when things are implanted into the system. I don't have to go into those details, but I think at this point in time, given the restraints, given the uncertainty for the economy going forward, if you just invested in those two pieces, you would probably prevent, I would say, 80 to 85% of the possible attacks that could happen. So that would be my quick way to start protecting businesses. I don't know, Jamie, anything you want to add there? Or?
No, Andre, I mean, you're hitting on points that I'm going to talk about.
Okay.
From my perspective, it's that digital risk protection. Digital risk protection, there's the three pieces that come into play, right? You want to monitor the dark web, be proactive, see what's there, see the trend analysis, and information tells a story. That story then helps you educate, moving on to that second piece of that pod, educating your employees from a cybersecurity awareness training, so phishing, ongoing training side, right? Because the end users are the weakest link. And then that third piece is that identity access management you touched upon from a 2FA side of things. I'll say, you want to make sure that you're protecting your machines through two-factor, protecting your applications through a single sign-on, and then also protecting, credentials through like a password manager. Just to be able to make sure that, you're taking those steps, being proactive, you're educating, the people who are being targeted from the social engineering, and then at the end of the day, putting locks on things. Because the statistic, as you mentioned, that 80-something%, it's higher, I think even almost into 90% when you put in 2FA, it eliminates, the person that's doing the hacking from the basement of their parents' house, or, the Starbucks coffee shop hacker, because they're going to go on to the next, target that doesn't have all of those stopgaps or whatever in place.
Awesome. Thanks, Jamie. Philip, do you have anything to share with our business owner audience today?
I think that Andre and Jamie both brought up very, very important points.
Mm-hmm.
The one piece that I would like to add is that when I talk to business owners, the first thing that I stress to them is education, education, education. Your first line of defense, really, after you talk about IT, after you talk about all the two-step authentication software that you need to put in place, which Jamie and Andre raised, which is extremely important. But from my point of view, it's education. It's taking the time, spending some money on getting your staff, getting everyone in your organization to understand and appreciate what these types of threats look like, to take the time to look at emails that you're not familiar with, or that just are new. Take the time to look at them, give them the steps and the education they need to understand, how do I determine if this is a phishing email, and try to stop these problems at their source. Everything that Andre and Jamie raised are very, very important, but the key is making sure that your people understand, what am I looking for in these emails? What are the types of things that are going to get me into trouble? And then spending some money on education and follow-up, and look at insurance as, if you get into trouble, The insurance policy is there from a financial perspective to help you get out of trouble, right? That's really what the insurance policy is trying to do, is give you the funds to be able to get yourself back up and running as quickly as possible. But I'm sure that Andre and Jamie would agree that making sure that you have all the pieces, the technology pieces in place to protect you in the event that this happens are extremely important. And one of those really is education. And that's where a company like Andre and his group can really help you, is getting your staff to understand what are these problems, and that they're real. And it's not just vaporware or brochureware. Sorry.
Absolutely. Now, moving on to what employees like myself can do to protect ourselves from the Gen 5 cyber attacks. So, Jamie, why don't you start us with answering this question?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I mean, from an employee perspective, right, end user perspective, is take this serious. I mean, think about the repercussions if you don't, right? So if you're just, laissez-faire, you see an email, you click on it, and next thing you know, some sort of, rogue software has been deployed onto your systems. It could shut your company down. You could be out of a job. I mean, that statistic from, 6 months out, 60% of small, medium businesses go out of business 6 months after an attack. About it from yourself, and then start drawing that circle. Hey, I don't want my other coworkers to, lose their job. So I'm going to do what I can to make sure I can protect my job, my position and my employer. So taking the things seriously, the education, the training, that training that you're getting deployed through your organization or through your employer, that training is applicable for personal stuff as well, right? The eBay stuff and all of those Facebook things. I get 5 to 6 of those a day in my personal email. Facebook, right? So I mean, we're all hit with it. So the education that we're getting at work is actually applicable, to home, or my bank account information if I get my monthly statements. How do I know if it's real or not? Is it coming from the bank or somebody else with malicious intent? So, the end users, what you're getting and what you're experiencing is definitely applicable for you individually. But again, think about your job. You don't want to see your employer go under. You want to have that job tomorrow, next week. So, take this all serious.
Got it. Thanks, Jamie. Philip, what do you think?
I think that Jamie hit on a number of very important points. I think that all I would add is that employees need to understand that whatever they do in a business environment or that they do in their personal environment is really open to hackers. Nobody is immune to it. So you really have to be vigilant of what you're doing, what sites are you going to, why are you going to those sites, and be aware of what you're doing on the web, because there are a lot of very nefarious characters out there that will exploit any opportunity that they get. And Jamie did raise a very important point. You can end up going to a site using your laptop, and then if you use your laptop to sign in to your company system or that network, you could be potentially exposing the entire corporate network to a malicious attack. So from my point of view, education and awareness are very, very important points.
Thanks, Philip. Andre, what do you think?
Yep. I really dislike scaring people. It's not the way we try to do things, and that's what it's sounding like here. But it is important, and this is happening, and people just don't realize because, again, it's not on the news. And in my line of work, at least once every couple of months, I'll get a phone call from somebody, most of the time crying, saying that they've been hacked, and can you come and help us? So we go over there and take a look, and for various reasons, there's nothing that we can do to help them because it's beyond that point. And to answer the question about employees, we know exactly what employee led in this malicious program or whatnot. So it's never anonymous. And it's really heartbreaking to see that when the employee's there and the boss is trying, like, why did this employee click on that? And we're kind of in the middle of things, and the end result is that company goes out of business because they just can't recover from that attack because they weren't properly prepared. So you don't see that on the news, right? It's not exciting enough to make CNN or CBC News or whatnot. but it's happening on a regular basis. And like I said earlier, it was traditional crime because it's just so much easier for people to get their head across. And, a lot of times I think when we talk to business owners, they feel like we're making this up, or, this is another thing I got to buy, or, I get it 100%. But having the vigilance and making sure that your employees know what they need to do, and employees themselves have to have some responsibility in this as well too, because you're not anonymous in the whole thing.
Got it. And I think you have an exact thing that employees can do that you can walk them through. So let's just jump right to that.
Yep. Okay, let's go through that. So we have this little thing here for you, and we can send this out to anybody who wants it if they want to pass it around to their staff or friends or whatnot. So we talk all the time about, washing your hands for 20 seconds to avoid COVID and singing a song and all the rest of it. We want to try to get that same kind of hygiene going when it comes to email. So take 20 seconds to review an email. So let's take a few seconds here to review this email. We've outlined where all the indicators are that this is a malicious email. So one of the first ones is, William Sarah, if you look at that highlighted there, the email address. So this company is millersupply.co, but see how they put NN, illersupply.co? So if you quickly look at that, when the phone's ringing and someone's yelling at you and all the rest of it, it's going to look like Miller Supply. So there's one clue right there that this email is not from Miller Supply. Attention all staff, too generic. When's the last time somebody sent an email, your boss sent an email saying attention all staff? I haven't seen that one in a while. Poor grammar is another good one that it gives away. So if your boss is not going to make those kind of grammatical mistakes, it's giving you a clue, then this is not coming from your boss, for example. Urgency is another one. Do this now, right? Click here now, that type of thing. So that's another red flag. Bad links. So bad links is a real tricky one because we're so used to just clicking on links, but if you were to hover over that link, you'll see this weird address that doesn't make any sense to. If it doesn't make any sense to you, chances are it's not a good link clicking on. And then the other ones are, there's an attachment on this. So why is there an attachment as well? And the attachment may not be a PDF. It may be something else that will try to inject software into your computer. And again, at the very bottom there, you can see that, the email address is spelt wrong. So we've seen these examples. Now, these are all of them on one page, but usually it's going to be one or two on an email. And the one that gets people the most is when their domain is spelled slightly differently. So, Miller Supply is the perfect example here where, you quickly look at that and may not have your glasses on or whatever, and it's going to show Miller Supply, and you're like, oh, that's my company. It's all good. And it's not. So 20 seconds, I know everyone's in a rush, everyone's stressed out, but spending some time to just make sure will save a whole lot of heartache later on. It's very hard to reverse this out once the horse has left the barn, so to speak.
Definitely. Thanks a lot, Andre. Now we'll quickly go through some of the questions that some of you have sent us while filling up the registration. Feel free to send more questions over the chat box. So the first question I think is for you, Jamie. It says, how do I know if my credentials are on dark web for sale? Is there a way for me to find out that my credentials are out there?
Absolutely. So that's a perfect actually redirect towards Andre for his organization that they can run your domain and also personal email addresses to be able to see if they're out there for sale on the dark web. And they give you some pointers in order to direct you in the right path to make sure your environment is protected. But that's something definitely to get in touch with Idealogical in order to have that done for yourself.
Yeah, and we're happy to run that for you. There's no cost. You reach out to me and you can get a report that'll tell you all your credentials that are out there. You'll see your username, you'll see your password, you'll see where it was breached, how long ago, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, if you're concerned, just send me or Aniri an email and we'll get you set up.
Awesome. The next question is very, very interesting. I think both Andre and Jamie, I think you both can jump in on answering this question. So it reads as, what should I do if I accidentally click on something and I should have not and realize seconds later, what should be my immediate next step? So I think this came from one of the employees who's kind of trying to figure out, what if I accidentally did end up clicking on something that I shouldn't have? And then once I've realized that I did something wrong, what should me as an employee do, or I as an employee do? Yeah. So Andre or
Who wants to
Jamie,
go
very
first? So,
particular.
Jamie, you want to go
Yeah,
first?
Andre, you can go because I mean,
Okay.
it's a situational response. So
Okay. Yep.
your best
So
practice is
it happens all the time.
Yep.
What I recommend is make a call directly to your IT provider, whoever that may be, or IT department, and let them know immediately what has happened. And they're going to take the precautions from that point to stop any spread. So it's important that they know as soon as possible. So don't like put your list, like, I'll call that guy at the end of the day when I'm done. You need to like stop everything and call them immediately, because if we get it fast enough, we can stop it from ripping through an entire network. But you basically have minutes to get it under control.
Yeah, if you see all of a sudden it pops a red screen or something like that, and it says, you've been encrypted. My thing is unplug that device from the network.
Yes. Yeah. That would be the next thing. Yeah.
So that it doesn't mushroom through and infect others or get to the servers or something of that nature. And as Andre was saying, you pick up that phone and call, your help, call your MSP immediately to be able to help mitigate that. That's the way. Unfortunately, sometimes, when you click on things you don't know, the unfortunate part is that you just don't know that you clicked on it because it's going to be an app or something that's running in the background. You might see a little bit of a delay in the transition between slides or between screens. So you may not know, but if you ever see anything that of the ordinary, immediately engage your IT support.
Yeah, a lot of times it'll present itself as like a little hiccup, like everybody's gone on the internet and they tried to go to a website and kind of nothing happened, and you just go on it again. That's how it would show up. So it's really, you couldn't even feel it in some cases. But if you're unsure, if you go back to that email, you're like, oh my goodness, that Miller was spelled wrong. Yes, unplug the machine, call. See, unplugging is difficult sometimes too. So
True.
on the laptop side of things, just close the lid.
Yeah.
And give us a call, or give whoever your IT a call.
Awesome. There's one of the questions on the chat box that is from Susan, and it says, is using facial recognition at login a good way to lessen risks? So I think, again, this could be Andre or Jamie. You guys can answer.
So facial recognition is more convenience than anything else at this point. So if you look at your iPhone, for example, the new update that came out has basically made facial recognition. If you're wearing a mask, you can't use facial recognition. So you got to put in your code again. So all the facial recognition is doing is putting in your code for you without you having to put the code in. Does that make sense? So it's just a convenience more than security, if you will. If somebody knows code to your phone, or somebody still knows your password, the device may be, so if you have facial recognition on a Windows device, for example, that's only limited to your laptop. So your username and password without that laptop can still be used, because there's no way of recognizing your face without the laptop. Does that make sense? Hopefully, somebody,
Yep.
Jamie and Eri, okay.
Yeah, it does.
So yeah, it's really limited to the device, and so it's not going to give you any more or less protection, if you will. It's just a convenience way of putting your password in.
Yeah. And just because I deal in the dark web and see all the horrible stuff, I won't go the scary route. But at the end of the day, the facial recognition, can be compromised. As Andre was just mentioning, Apple had to loosen the restrictions on that as a result of facial recognition basically not working with people wearing masks today. I'm a believer in the code because only you know the code. Somebody can take the phone and, bend a picture, a high res picture to be able to get the facial recognition to work. So the code is in your mind, and it's something that yourself, is a best efforts. But, the more layers that you have in place, the better off you are at the end of the day.
Awesome. Thanks, Jamie. The last question, I think, is for Philip. Philip, the question is, can cyber liability added to my existing insurance policy? I think you touched upon it a little, so maybe somebody's looking for a little clarification there.
Depending on which insurance company you're with and the type of policy you have, the simple answer is yes, it can be attached. but it depends on the insurance company and whether they offer it as an attachment or an endorsement.
Interesting. Okay. All right. Thanks, Philip. And a very last question, a last minute question that just came in from Melry. It kind of asks that, let me see where the question starts from. So when working from home and using a VPN, is there a server location that is better than another? I think it's a question for you, Andre. Do you want me to repeat that again?
Yeah, so
There you go.
yeah, so I guess they're not VPNing into a corporate network. They're just VPNing in to have a VPN. Like that's what I'm unsure about there. Because if they're VPNing into their company, only one location that they would VPN into. But if they're using a VPN service to encrypt their traffic over the internet, then I would just recommend keeping it in Canada if you can find a server in Canada if you're using ExpressVPN or any one of those services. And if that didn't answer your question, then just reach out to us and I'm happy to answer it for you.
Awesome. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for asking some of these questions. If you have any further questions, like Andre said, feel free to reach out to us. We are happy to clarify any doubts that you may have when it comes to cybersecurity.